And I'm totally excited to, first of all, see so many faces, and I'm so excited to be able to tell you about this really wonderful opportunity that I had, which came to me as an intern. So I actually interned for Dr. Carrion for 2 years, and then I was hired as an employee for 3 years, so a total of 5 years working with them. And all right, so this Stanford Q-Centered Treatment was part of the Stanford Early Life Stress Research Program. My boss, Victor Carrion, is a really well-known child maltreatment expert. He's a child psychiatrist working for Stanford. And they're going to have official training eventually through the website. They plan to do a book, and they plan to do web-based training modules, and there'll be a certification available for it sometime in the near future. I want to start by talking about the ACE study, because there are a few studies that we as therapists should know really, really well. And this is one of them. And I don't know about, well, I'm more recent through school, but even in my school, they didn't cover the ACE study. I mean, how many people have had training where you have the ACE study covered? Just show of hands. Yeah, very few of us. Right. All right, so this was looking at adverse childhood events, and it was a collaboration between Kaiser and the CDC, but really is the brainchild of Vincent Felitti from Kaiser. And it was born out of, he was doing a weight loss program, and he discovered that there was a certain subset that did really well at weight loss and then dropped out once they were successful. And so they did exit interviews with them to try to figure out why that was. And it turned out that all of the ones that had that happen, what they had in common was child sexual abuse. So that got him thinking about how to look at that. So they surveyed the Kaiser population in San Diego, 17,000 middle-class people basically. It was 80% Euro-American, 10% African-American, and then 10% Hispanic. So you couldn't say that this was, we couldn't write this study off by saying, oh, they only surveyed people of low socioeconomic status. No, this was a really good survey of mainstream America. They asked about 10 possible types of traumatic experiences. So not the number of times it happened, just the type, all right? That means you could have a score of 0, if nothing ever happened to you, to 10. And so if you had experienced physical abuse one time or hundreds of times, you still get a point of 1 on that part of the chart. All right, a score of 6 or more means your life expectancy is 20 years less than the general population. Very scary. If you have a score of 4, you're 4,600 times more likely to have attempted suicide. So they looked at 3 kinds of abuse. They were looking at emotional abuse, and you can see 11% of the participants experienced it, and the percentages are how many experienced it. Physical abuse, they did not count spanking with an open hand, but they did count being beaten with a whip or a belt or, you know, a spoon or anything like that. And then contact sexual abuse, so not somebody that made you feel uncomfortable. They had to actually physically touch you for it to count. And that one was pretty significant because we discovered that 1 out of 5 people in our country experiences child sexual abuse. There are 2 kinds of neglect they looked at, and the first one was physical, so you're hungry, you're dirty clothes, and that you're unloved. You're not wanted in your family. And then there were 5 kinds of household dysfunction. So the mother treated violently, that somebody in the house used drugs or alcohol, that somebody was in prison, that somebody was ill, chronically ill, could be mentally ill, suicidal, depression, anything like that. And then not being raised by both biological parents. So the big surprise was that only 1/3 had a score of 0, which was huge because they assumed that, you know, it would probably be 8 out of 10 people would have a score of 0, and not at all the case. 1 out of 8 people having a score of 4. Now here's the really big news. The ACE score is directly proportional to the rates of heart disease, obesity, COPD, liver. The number of psychotic episodes you have is directly related to your ACE score. Now, how many people got taught that schizophrenia is something that you inherit? I did. But it's absolutely related to your ACE score, to the number of adverse childhood events. It's also related to your likelihood to be disabled and how disabled you will be. It's related to how much money you will earn. It's related to if you'll actually have job satisfaction, and a host of other things. So they developed this ACE pyramid to try to explain what was going on. And so it started with, there's adverse childhood experiences, and we don't know how, so that's why this is open. We don't know how, but somehow it disrupts your neurodevelopment in your brain at an early state. So then you have some sort of impairment, and then you get to be basically a teenager, and you adopt health risk behaviors, which leads to disease and disability and social problems, and then to early death for 16% of people. And he said that adverse childhood experiences are the leading determinant of what happens to the health and social well-being of a nation's population. And then made a really big plea that we need to do way better parent education. Way better. So what about spanking? Strauss and Pascal found that it lowers the kid's IQ 5 points. 715 low birth weight children, the ones who received corporal punishment, had the lowest IQ. Countries with the least corporal punishment have the highest IQs. 17,000 people surveyed on that one. The American Academy of Pediatrics has found a huge correlation between interpartner violence and corporal punishment, and says it's the least effective way to discipline. Spanked children are more likely to be aggressive and bully, do not internalize rules as well, and are much more likely to engage in criminal and antisocial behavior. They're also more likely to verbally or physically coerce their partners into sex. They're more likely to have risky sex. They are more likely to engage in masochistic sex, for instance, using spanking as a form of arousal. And frequent spanking can lead to symptoms of post-traumatic stress in kids. So in 2009, my wonderful boss did a brain imaging study using functional MRI to look at kids who had PTSD and then they had high rates of cortisol, the stress hormone, and discovered that they had poor functioning, smaller volume of their hippocampus. And he actually told me that it goes a lot deeper than that he said there was more differentiation between the two hemispheres. The back of the brain, you know, which is sort of our autonomic brain where we breathing and heart rate and all of that's back here, is a little bit larger. So these kids, and there's less access to the prefrontal cortex for these kids. So they are acting more on instinct and impulse than kids who haven't had trauma. It was the first study to show that there were actual changes in a growing child's brain due to trauma, and it made international headlines. I threw in this brain slide. So here's the hippocampus, and that's where there's a smaller volume and it doesn't function as well. Traumatized kids. All right, he did another study. They just did a chart review. They went up to Bayview Hunter Point Clinic and looked through the charts of 701 kids and gave them an ACE score. And 2/3 of them had a score of 1. 12% had a score of 4 or more. Now, if you have a score of 4, you are 30 times more likely to have a learning disorder. or a behavioral problem. How many people got taught you were born with a learning disorder? I did. Totally related to adverse childhood events. You're also twice as likely to be obese.